Welcome to the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research. My name is Alex Weiser. I'm the Public Programs Director of YIVO. And we're thrilled to have you here with us, joining from all around the world, a nice large crowd today, to hear about Henry Sapoznik's new book, The Tourist's Guide to Lost Yiddish New York City. Henry Sapoznik is an award-winning producer, musicologist, performer, and writer in the fields of traditional and popular Yiddish and American music and culture. Many will know Henry as the founder of the YIVO Sound Archives, and also many will know Henry as the creator of the Yiddish Radio Project, a wonderful thing that's really worth checking out. And leading Henry in this discussion of his new book is YIVO's own Eddy Portnoy, author of Bad Rabbi, and other strange but true stories from the Yiddish press, among other wonderful things, and YIVO's exhibitions curator and academic advisor. So without further ado, let's get started.
Okay. Thanks, Alex. Welcome, Henry. I'm going to officially introduce you, read your biography, which is quite extensive. So if you'll give me a bit of time, Henry,
back in 10
yeah,
minutes.
come back in 15 minutes. So let's go. Henry Sapoznik is an award-winning producer, musicologist, and performer and writer in the fields of traditional and popular Yiddish and American music and culture. A native speaker and child of Holocaust survivors, Henry grew up in an Orthodox home and attended Lubavitch Yeshiva and Yeshiva Rabbi Chaim Berlin.
Going deep. This is where you go.
Rachmanos Litzolim. Sapoznik was the founding director of the Sound Archives of the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research in New York, where we are today, from 1982 to 1995. While there, Sapoznik founded and directed the internationally acclaimed Klez the Yiddish folk arts program, beginning in 1985 for the next 30 years. A 5-time Grammy-nominated producer-performer, he's been on over 50 records, including having reissued over 30 anthologies of Yiddish, jazz, old-time cantorial, ragtime blues, Italian swing, black-faced minstrelsy, and bluegrass recordings. He won a 2002 Peabody Award for co-producing the 10-part NPR series, The Yiddish Radio Project, which Alex mentioned, which is drawn from his collection of over 10,000 items, now part of the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress. Among Henry's publications are The Complete Klezmer, which became the standard tune book of the klezmer revival, while his klezmer, Jewish music from Old World to Our World, won the 2000 ASCAP Deems Taylor Award for Excellence in Music History. In 2023, the Association of Recorded Sound Collections honored Sapoznik with its Lifetime Achievement Award for work in recording, broadcasting, and historical research and reissues. In addition, Henry is a highly regarded banjo player, lap steel guitarist, and nationally ranked bullseye pistol shooting competitor.
You're reading that.
Most recently, he published, which we're going to talk about today, The Tourist's Guide to Lost Yiddish New York City, and is currently finishing its companion audiobook for Blackstone Audio. I have a few more pages. No, just kidding. Welcome, Henry. We're thrilled to have you. And I will say, by way of an opener, that this book is fantastic. It is not only a joy to read, it has enormous historical value because it documents a history that most standard historians ignore. And this ranges from the types of food Jews ate to who owned the restaurants they ate in, why they became popular, and even why the restaurants failed. Henry does the same for Jewish architecture. And what's interesting here is he doesn't do it with synagogues, which is what you expect when you hear Jewish architecture. But this is a whole new look at different types of Jewish architecture. He does this for music and theater as well. The book is really a rich tapestry of New York Yiddish culture that we really only have a faint echo of today. And as I said, it's a history that doesn't appear in traditional history books. And the reality is I can't think of any other book, history or otherwise, that has a chapter on Dr. Brown's celery soda. So
you would have done it. You're the only book that would.
It's really amazing. So there are 4 chapters in this book. One about eating, one about architecture, one about music, and one about theater. but all of these chapters really contain multitudes. And they're just the detail is phenomenal, and it's like I can't wait to get into it. But before we start, I want to ask how working at YIVO and developing its sound archive helped influence what you've accomplished. Not necessarily just with this book, but with this book and in other realms as well. And I don't know, maybe begin with, how you wound up getting it to YIVO in the first place.
Wow. Well, YIVO is the center of the concentric circle. I mean, as far as when I first started working there as a volunteer, I used to my interest in old sound recordings. This was before there was a set sound archive, so I would come to the old building on Fifth Avenue. I would come with a turntable to be able to play the records that were in. Then there wasn't a collection. It was sort of like a assemblage. So being at YIVO and having all of the resources available, it was like a kid in a candy store. And so a lot of this research, like the research that triggered the actual book, actually started at YIVO, which was when I was working on the Dick Spotswood discography, ethnic music on record, which was a listing of every ethnic recording made in America from 1895 to 1942. And I was doing the Yiddish catalog, and it's where I first discovered a lot of recordings, including the listing of Thomas LaRue Jones, Der Schwarze Hasen. And it took 40 years for that record to turn up. It actually turned up at YIVO. And so this was the first real story of forgotten history of the Schwarze Chazonim. And so being at YIVO was an incredible catapult to having the materials, having the resources to go into the materials, and then to disseminate those materials out from. YIVO was always a great place for that period, was a great place for popularization.
Right. Great. Um, so obviously YIVO was an impetus in the creation of this current project, this book. When did you actually start in the book, and how did it develop?
As I said, it actually started during the first COVID lockdown, when I was my music performance had taken a hit, and I was looking for something to flesh out the time, and built my website, henrysapoznik.com, and com. So it's but and then started a blog. That was going to be my thing. And as I said, the thing that triggered it was the rediscovery of the Thomas LaRue Jones recording, which for me was really critical, because I'd known about it since the 70s. And once the recording turned up, it initiated a whole new era of research. So I spent the next year, my blog, which is still up. I was just amazed. The first blog I did on the Schwarze Chazonim got like 100,000 hits.
Wow.
I mean, like, talk about a minion. It was like, so anyway, that kind of convinced me that this was, so I started writing these blogs, and a friend of mine said, hey, these, you should do something with this. So it kind of grew out of that.
Wow, amazing, amazing. And then, okay, so it started with the Thomas LaRue recording, and so this obviously, you know, helped was the kernel of your of the chapter on music. but then how did you decide, what the other, I mean, because the chapters are large. So how did you decide what the other categories were going to be?
It's really funny. It's those chapters, the music stuff, like you said, I've written about music now for 30 or 40 years, and that's what people know. But all this other stuff, like architecture, and once I found out, like for example, that the same guy, Harrison G. Wiseman, designed the four major Yiddish theaters in New York City. This is stuff that has always fascinated me about, a lot of stuff that I'm really interested in but never wrote about. So the architecture, about food, and the crime really, again, with a tip of the schimel to you and your work by shedding light
Thank you.
on it's more about the Rashi than the Blat Gemara. This is like, we're interested in the backstory here. So it all became this other stuff about things that, like this errant jigsaw puzzle pieces that somehow fit in, even though you don't think that they overlap.
Right, right. Yeah, as far as the crime goes, I was happily surprised to discover that you reference a hitman by the name of Little Kishka Kovner. Um, you know, and with the picture on the front of the book, it's perfect. You know,
Oh,
really,
Kishka, that is the subtext of this book.
right, definitely, definitely. Um, so you the, when I was reading the book, I was really astounded by the level of detail. Uh, it was, there are so many little fantastic asides and references, to all kinds of things. And I could just mention a few of them. Sid Caesar was married at Moskowitz and Lupowitz. I, I, there was a woman who was crowned the gefilte fish queen. Um, there was something called the Yiddish Sons of Erin. I don't know. How did you find these things?
Some people call it rabbit holes. I call it a rabbi hole. It's no, actually, when I was working at YIVO, that was the period in the 70s when the big process of taking the morgue edition of the Yiddish newspapers and making microfilm out of them, and then sadly throwing away the newspapers.
Right.
But the amazing thing that we couldn't have known was the digitization of the microfilm that enables us to do these massive searches. The National Library of Israel has, like,
Right.
all the Yiddish papers online. So you can do these like surreal, out of you wouldn't believe it kind of searches. Hey, let me see what happens when I put in Sid Caesar, or and the results, the overlap, it really shows that a lot of these worlds that you didn't think actually interacted with each other had a really dynamic interaction.
Right. Wow. I mean, we could just sit here and talk about the food aspect of it. I mean, I could sit here and just talk about, Arnold Stang and the chunky theater of the air. All of these, these sort of different connections. But, what's interesting about it is, especially in the eating section, you see this trajectory where, you talk about people who are waiters or countermen who wind up opening their own restaurants. And there's this sort of upward mobility of this immigrant generation, and it's just, that, you know including the all of these details about these places that, I went to a few of these places, but, and I didn't grow up in New York. I, came here as a kid as a tourist, but you know, these are all so well known. And some of them are, I think will be completely unknown. Um, so I'm wondering, as while writing about this or while researching it, how many of these places and environments did you have sort of a personal connection to?
Well, it's interesting that, well, first of all, without getting um, this picture of Kishke King was taken the year I was born, around the corner from where I was born this was on Pitkin Avenue, and I lived around the corner on Chester Street. So I actually like remember it. So and I hate to intrude on history. I kind of like to be an observer and an observant Jew. But
Wait,
so
I just want to add that someone in the audience is and in the chat they just said that they're the grandchild of the Kishke King.
be still mine heart. That's why I love this work, is that I only wish that I had known that. I wrote for this book, I wrote a nice biography of the Kishke King. And it's to me, it's the trajectory of Jewish American life on a plate. And the food thing reflects, I mean, like, for example, the whole thing about dairy restaurants, which is sort of astounding when you consider, as I write about in the book, that over 75% of Jews are lactose intolerant. I mean, how do you account for a major food movement relying on people for whom, for the most part, cannot digest the food that you're serving? These are incredible forward motions of a culture, irrespective of the fact that you can't digest it. I want to have another, another blintz, So it's really a sense of inevitable forward motion.
Right. And you have the dairy restaurants, and obviously Ben Catcher created this dairy restaurant book, which is just also, encyclopedic. Um and your take provides a lot of different information about it. But it's the dairy restaurants, it's the cafeterias. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the Prolect cafeteria, which, like, the stories surrounding that are just fantastic. I don't know if you want to just go into that a bit.
Oh, just absolutely. Again, it really reflects the dynamism of the culture at the time. That for a brief time there was a communist cafeteria on Union Square in the same building that the Daily Worker and the Freiheit, the Yiddish communist paper, were written and published. And amazing that the American Communist Party said, "Oh, we're going to go into the retail world." I think the saddest and kind of funniest story is that the Prolec went into they opened up this massive new version of the restaurant. It opened in September 1929, just like 3 weeks before the cratering of the stock market. I mean, shouldn't communists have been hip to the faults of capitalism, that this is the last thing you should do? But so yeah, but for a while it was there's some great descriptions that I found of slumming tours, going to the communists, going to Prolectos, to the communist cafeteria. I like the whole thing of slumming too. That's a kind of a subtext through a lot of the book, that it was the uptown crowd. It was people coming for another thrill. So they had gotten tired of Chinatown, so they went to see Joe Moskowitz playing his dulcimer at his restaurant. So it's again, these worlds collide in the most incredibly unanticipated way.
Right. And you just mentioned Joe Moskowitz, who was one of the people who ran Moskowitz and Lupowitz, this sort of this restaurant with, musical accompaniment. But, one of the things you write about is this phenomenon of the gregarious restaurant host. I don't think maybe that's not really a particularly Jewish phenomenon, but in this environment, it almost seems like a tumler. This kind of guy who runs the restaurant who's bringing people. He's like a puller, um, but he's keeping the people coming to this place. What is that? Why do these restaurants all have this figure that that's connecting to his customers?
There's again a lot of overlap for someone like Joe Moskowitz, who was a cimbalom virtuoso. It was basically an extension of his living room. And he ran it. I mean, the place was open like 15 hours a day, and he would just. But you also have to think about it. Some of these guys were kind of fulfilling the food equivalent of being a badchen. That they were setting the in motion the structure of the evening, and really being the figurehead to in fact, one of the great and in a way sad stories was about the ending of Boris Tomaszewski after he had declined as a matinee idol. He was taken in by a restaurant called the Old Romanian, which was the big competitor to Moskowitz and Lupowitz. And what started out as kind of like this weird, almost freakish kind of like a parody of him reading Yiddish Shakespeare after he'd just gotten in the stage, had like chorus girls, and he became so popular at the end that Boris Tomaszewski opened his own Romanian restaurant, and he died with his name in lights on Second Avenue, which is like, what better ending for, it's so these restaurants, especially when Jewish diets were defined by the culture that they really identified with. These restaurants became like a critical magnetic north for how the community identified itself.
Right. And you have this, this phenomenon of slumming in these restaurants where, people from uptown come downtown to enjoy these environments. But you also write about Jewish cafeterias, which is a completely different type of restaurant, that's I don't think people went slumming in cafeterias. I think people or maybe they did, I don't know. These were for people on budgets. And yet there's this Jewish element there to the point where you rattle off these references from Yiddish fiction where cafeterias appear. How, like it's something I never really anticipated. The role of the cafeteria in Yiddish fiction. It sounds like somebody's dissertation, I guess.
Chazno Chalila. Don't you're not gonna go
I don't
back.
know. It could be a great dissertation. I don't know.
Yeah.
But like did one lead to another? Did the writing about these sort of larger, better off financially restaurants wind up leading you to the cafeteria phenomenon, or did you get to it in some other way?
It grew out of the obsession that once one rabbit hole was completed. So, well, if you talk about this, how can you not talk about that? And so each of them, the dairy restaurant, the delicatessen, the Romanian restaurant, the cafeteria, were really the four major food empires that the Jewish world, and like you say, the cafeteria, which was a budget universe. Someone could eat a full meal for under $1 in 19 minutes. and each of them reflected, and as I point out, each of the cafeterias had a subset of the Jewish world. So one cafeteria in Manhattan was for all the second-rate Jewish vaudeville comedians, and another cafeteria was for the taxi drivers, and so each of them became a kind of autonomous cultural region. But what I liked also is that in writing about the cafeterias of all of the places that I wrote about food, cafeterias, hands down, had more instances of incidents where where armed robbery happened at the time that the restaurant was full of people eating. People were so consumed with their dish that they didn't see someone walking out of the cafeteria with a safe. And I must have found like a dozen. Dubrow's cafeteria, which was the one that you put in. That was the great search tool, put in cafeteria in looking through the forward or the tug, and like, it was like all of this stuff just waiting to get out. It was like, the door was open and I couldn't close it again. So,
Wow.
so yeah, cafeterias I really found, because it's a cash business. It's open 24 hours. It's like I call it, it was like, an ATM with food. That there were so many robberies, and there were so, many colorful, Murder Incorporated hung out at the famous cafeteria, the famous dairy restaurant on Eastern Parkway, which was also near Dubrow's. So people would be shooting at each other from the cafeteria to the dairy restaurant. So it was pretty freiliche Zeiten.
Right, clearly, clearly. I mean, and also, to be a fly on the wall in one of these places, just to hear the dialogue or to even imagine it's just it must have been it really must have been incredible. Just, as far as the food goes, I'm just curious. So, like, you had these four different large categories. I'm just curious if you considered street food as as one of these phenomena, because that's something that certainly existed as well in Jewish neighborhoods.
I think the most popular street food were knishes.
Yeah,
Uh, and I have
yeah, you do have.
I do have a thing, and of course the original Coney Island Schwartz's potato pie in Coney Island in the 1920s. This was the popular street food, and I loved the knish story because of how industrialization and assimilation changed this very homely dish, the knish and gabila. Of course, when I loved finding out that here is this guy who was responsible for making, millions of knishes, and the guy wasn't even an Ashkenazic Jew; he was a Ladino. From the
Got
town
it.
of
Yeah.
Key. I mean, it was like, who wrote this stuff? So, but yeah, great. A lot of this, trying to get to the bottom of a lot of these stories. And I think what's interesting about the food thing more than anything else is that there is a continuity. Like, for example, Katz's Delicatessen, which has for years proudly, said, "Oh, founded in 1888." That always weird. I said that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
You know, for those of us who are into the rise of Yiddish culture in America, I said, "Wait, you mean someone was here early enough?" And of course, once I dug into the Rashi and the census reports and birth certificates and everything, 1888 never happened. It was more like 1917, but it was a misstated fact at one point, and then it just became So it just became what is the man who shot Liberty Valance. If you have, right, if you have a choice between the myth and the truth, print the
Okay, to print the myth. That's true. And to a certain degree, it's amazing, but it's also somewhat sad that Katz's is the last man standing.
Second Avenue
So
Deli.
Second Avenue Deli is still around, right? That's true,
Yeah,
but it's been open and closed.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and I think of the Romanian style restaurants,
Just
Sammy's
reopened.
just reopened. I had been there years ago. I haven't tried
I'm
the
still grepsing. I'm having like repeated Grep syndrome from a visit in a previous century. So this is, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean
Actually, I think the meta the analogy you use in the book about Sammy's is that it's like a long delayed Greps. I think is what is really very fitting. Really incredible. Um, so, like I said, we could talk about food the whole time, but there are three other sections of this book, and so I think the most anomalous section is architecture. And so, like I said at the beginning, when people say the words Jewish architecture, they're going to think synagogue, or something of that nature. And yet, you manage to find these buildings that, were built by and for Jews. And maybe you could talk a little bit about how you chose to do that, and why, and what you chose to focus on.
yeah, the architecture thing, and again, I did like anyone would. I started by looking at synagogues, and when I realized the massive number of variations, the incredible diversity, the just there. I mean, I said it's chutzpahdik to turn it into a mere chapter,
Yeah.
and that deserves some serious research. The When it occurred to me, I had written an article a few years ago about the history of the theater that would become the Fillmore East, and that it had been a regular theater, a movie house, and a mixed-use vaudeville house. But when I did the research, I found that the same guy who had designed that theater also designed the still extant Maurice Schwartz, the theater on 12th Street and
Right.
Second Avenue, and the theater in Brooklyn, what is now the Church of All Peoples on the edge of Brownsville. One guy and a couple of other theaters. And it just became really interesting to me that one person within a period of the early to late 20s was responsible for building the major spate of bespoke Yiddish theaters. Most of the other Yiddish theaters were like the immigrants themselves. They moved into someone else's former
Sure.
quarters. But here were these new theaters, and the guy, Harrison Wiseman, you think, oh, Epis. No, he wasn't. The Wiseman makes you think, it's not Joseph Wiseman. But so the backstory got to me, and then it was there was a parallel story about the three skyscrapers on the Lower East Side, two of which still exist, and I write about them both: the Forward Building and the former Yarmoluski Bank on Canal Street. The most tragic story is the building that's not there, and that was the Libby's Hotel.
Right.
And it's such a major story. It's such an incredible story about aspirations of the Jewish world for the uplift of the socioeconomic Lower East Side community. And it's such a tragic. You stand on that corner and you can't believe that there was this massive, unbelievably lush and luxe hotel that only lived for 3 years before it was ripped down because of a incredibly corrupt city system. But and of course it's such a amazing story about how the Jewish world was able to see past the issues that were going on and wanted something, saw the Doakite of the Lower East Side. And so these buildings, to me, the two that survive, that are now, luxury spaces, the
Right.
irony, the
Yeah,
forward
of
building,
course.
right? I mean, it's like, all of these stories could have been Yiddish musicals in the 20s. I mean, they're so outrageous, they're so over the top that, oh yeah, any of these weird plot lines could have worked.
Right, right. Yeah, no, who would believe that, the Forwarts building, the first Jewish skyscraper on the Lower East Side that houses a socialist newspaper winds up as a Chinese church and then a luxury condo. I mean, it's crazy. It's
I did the math that the cost of the smallest apartment in the luxury building equaled in value to the construction of the forward building by the forward in 1923. It's like, wait, these numbers are like unbelievably, like when you think about them, because the symbolism, and there was the great story about the bas reliefs on the front of the building of
right,
Karl Marx, and how the Chinese owners, the very right-wing, very religious, anti-communist owners, when they found out that LaSalle and
right.
they,
Marx and Engels, they
yeah,
come.
yeah, it was like, get this off. Luckily, when they took them down, they actually saved them, so they got replaced when the building was upgraded. So, but what a amazing, and I also like that overlap, the Chinese, when the neighborhoods get handed off, that there is this residue, like the story about the garden cafeteria, that had been several cafeterias prior, and it was it was around the corner from the forward building. And when it finally sold out and a Chinese restaurant took over, when a subsequent Chinese restaurant did a renovation, they found the original garden sign under the subsequent Chinese sign. So
Wow.
there was a certain amount of restoration and preservation unintentionally, but there it was. It was like waiting to be uncovered.
Right. It's great. It's great that actually happened. Um, all right, I want to pivot to one of your other chapters on music. Um, Tell me a bit about Professor Frank Seiden.
Whew. Great, amazing story. I first learned about Frank Seiden when I was working as a sound archivist at the YIVO and working on the Spotswood discography. Frank Seiden is, if you remembered for anything among a small number of people, was one of the pioneer recording artists. He made his first records 1900, 1901, one of the first Jewish records ever recorded. But finding out his life prior to this, that he was a major contributor to American magic. And this was a time, magic, and another of my hobbies, my obsessions, shall we say. Like any of the other entertainment industries, because it was self-inventing and new, there was no history of anti-Semitism. So a lot of Jews became involved in magic, and they would, of course, all change their names. They would put an I at the end of their names. So Houdini, or Malini,
Right.
who was Mendel Katz, and Frank Seiden, who was this master of close-up hand ledger domain, little magic tricks, and it became all the rage. It became all the rage of this up close, intimate magic that became really the hallmark of modern magic. And Seiden went through a number of these careers, being a magician, being a recording artist, then opening some of the first Nickelodeons in New York, first for sound recordings and then for movies. And his son, Joseph Seiden, went into the family businesses and was one of the leading producers of B Yiddish pictures through the 30s and 40s. Joseph Seiden, I mean, with all of the great stars. So there was this incredible continuity. But Seiden, I think one of the things that really saddened me that here was Seiden who made I count something like 200 recordings between
Wow.
1901 and 1905 when he left the business and did all of this stuff, ran all of these. There's a great description of the Frank Seiden mixed use theater on Willett Street on the Lower East Side. It's great memoir of it by George Burns when
Oh,
he performed, when not he performed, he was like a yingle, a stage yingle. It's this absolutely brilliantly observed moment of Yiddish popular culture coming to grips with dominant American culture. It's a wonderful description. So Seiden lived this amazing life, and yet I could not find an obit for him in any of the Yiddish papers.
wow, that's incredible. I mean, that's shocking.
Just hey, it wasn't that was the thing that made me saddest. People like the Joe of Frank Seiden, Solomon Shmulevitz, one of the greatest Yiddish composers, over 500 songs he composed. A Brivelet der Mame, some of the cornerstone died in poverty. It was kind of and again the red buttons routine. Didn't get a dinner. He didn't get it. He didn't get an obit. He didn't, it was like,
That's it. It is tragic, but you know what? Red Buttons also appears in the book. Um, like what doesn't appear in the book? It's astounding. But no, but this is actually something I didn't know. You talk about the Joe and Paul routine, made famous by the Barton brothers, um, and here, I'm reading that Red Buttons that Seymour Chvast has a hand in this. How does that happen?
that's a great that was an outgrowth of when I was doing the Yiddish Radio Project. That was part of the research. And again, it was this total having these tools, these research tools. And when I reached out to him, he was like, "Who told you about that?" He was. It was like everyone had forgotten because the little bit of history about it, was the Barton brothers, and of course, there'll be a lot more of that. The next book I'm working on broadcasting, but the advertising of was critical, especially on radio. It was the only way a lot of these shows were going to happen. But getting back, that Red Buttons had developed this skit before he left for the war, and it had become so popular that the Barton brothers were able to, take it on and make it their own, And of course, everyone who says they remember the radio show actually remembers the parody, the recording. They don't remember the radio show that it came from. So it's a funny irony. It's
Right.
famous, but it's totally unknown.
Right. It's Schrodinger's pence.
Absolutely.
So we're gonna in about 5 minutes we're gonna break for audience questions, and I just wanted to mention to the audience that if you do have questions for Henry Sapoznik, please put them in the Q&A section of the Zoom, not in the chat, because I'm not going to look at the chat. I'm only going to look at the Q&A section, and hopefully we'll get some questions there. So the rest of the music chapter is chock full of everything from klezmer to jazz to cantorial, and it's just it's amazing. It's got a whole section on women cantors, which at the time they couldn't actually function as cantors. And then there's a subsection on black cantors, and also female black cantors, which has got to be the most niche. And it's funny because I remember looking through the Yiddish press, seeing advertisements for these things.
Oh, yeah.
But I never, and I remember vaguely thinking, oh, maybe this is something I should investigate. But I never did. And so I'm glad that you did, because you really dredged up, sort of an incredible history of this phenomenon, which I think, today nobody knows about. And it's really, it's one of the charms of this kind of history that, you're bringing up these instances that, have been completely forgotten. And it's just so valuable to sort of to complement and complete the larger general history that maybe people don't know about that either. But in any case, it's an entree into a world that that people just had no familiarity with.
Well, I think especially, and it's a really good point, because for me anyway, the story about the Black Cantors, which, as you said, you couldn't open a Yiddish newspaper in the 20s without seeing these
Right.
display ads for the Schwarze Chazonim. And to me, it was always, what is this? Is this some sort of weird minstrel show thing? Is it, oh, he's good for a Schwarze? It was some weird, just when the record turned up, the only known record of a period Black Cantor, when I listened to it, one side is in Yiddish, one side is in Ivre, in Chazones, and I was totally blown away. It was exactly how the press described him. It was so heartfelt, it was so informed, and that, to me, the idea of incorporating a culture of which you are not a member and internalizing all of the nuances, especially language, because he was supposedly fluent, both of them, both Thomas LaRue Jones and Sophie not Sophie Kurtzer, Goldie, the
Goldie, yeah.
Schwarzenegger, were performing for immigrant Yiddish-speaking Jews, and these audiences really, it meant something to them. So to me, it's just like, how could it mean so much to an emerging community and then be so completely forgotten? So it became the sort of like the propulsive center of wanting to find out, well, what's the context here? And it became, in fact, there's a lot more stuff. People want to go to my website with all of the blogs at henrysapoznik.com, and there's a bunch more stuff. I mean, for the book, I probably had like 5,000 newspaper downloads, most of those Yiddish. And so the quotidian, the looking day after day in these newspaper accounts gave a sense of rightness, that this was such a part, an everyday part of people's lives, and yet completely disappeared.
Right. No, and that's the value of the book, is that you bring this to you bring all of this to a new audience. Okay, just before we get to questions from the audience, I just want to ask, is there anything you left out of the book?
Ain't Kleinikate. I've talked to you. This is what my mentor down in North Carolina, Tommy Jerry, used to call 10 pounds of taters and an 8-pound sack. This was I had 10 pounds of taters, but I only had an 8-pound sack. So there's a lot of stuff. Gott sei Dank, like I said, I have this book on radio that I'm working on now, and it's going to again. It was like years ago I met Irving Howe when the World of Our Fathers came out, and he was at the YIVO. And I asked kind of innocently, I said, "You have all this amazing stuff in there. Why isn't there anything about radio?" And he said, "Well, it wasn't really that important." And that became, it got lodged in the back of my head. So it took years from having started to work at the YIVO and then doing the Yiddish Radio Project, and now finally having a chance to ingather all of this stuff and write it at my leisure is like a second bite at the apple. Sign me up. I am really thrilled.
Wow. You really, thank God for COVID, I guess. Really served you very well. Okay, let's get to some audience questions. This is from Mitchell Grubler. With such a rich history and so much of the building stock still standing, why is there not a single NYC historic district on the Lower East Side? Interesting question. I think there must be like a Lower East Side historical society, or maybe like a village historical society that deals with this. I don't know. Are you familiar with this issue?
Uh, I mean, it's something that, for example, the Jaffe Theater on Second Avenue and 12th Street was the restoration was thanks to landmarking and a beautiful job it was done. Other things like, for example, the concrete slabs that are in front of the old Second Avenue deli, the Yiddish Theater Walk of Fame, falling apart. I mean, you can't even you can't there's been no maintenance for years. So the attempts at creating a visibility of this lost moment, some succeed, some fail, but there seems to be, it's on a case by case basis rather than the encompassing area.
Okay. Bob Olish asks, what else is Arnold Stang known for besides chunky ads? It's a good question. I mean, he was a comedian. He was in It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World. He was in that. Um, oh,
Samson Comes to New York. Are you
what?
kidding? The first Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, Samson Comes to New York, starred Arnold Schwarzenegger and Arnold Stang, the two Arnolds.
Oh, that's a good that's a good bit of trivia.
Chunky be damned. This was one of the great cultural moments. It is on YouTube. Don't blame me if for any stains that happen after watching it. But P.S. Arnold Schwarzenegger is dubbed in the film. So
Unsurprising at that time.
right.
Mitch Gerber asks, is Mr. Sapoznik familiar with the episode of the 1960s TV show Car 54, Where Are You, in which Molly Pekin plays Mrs. Bronson?
Two episodes.
Two episodes.
Two episodes that Mrs. Bronson, well, what a great, both of those fabulous. Yeah, absolutely. Nat Hiken. Gott sei Dank for Nat Hiken.
Someone who just left their email, RJ Peanuts, asked about the crime chapter. Was there any reluctance or something similar on the part of Jewish cemeteries to have an Augie Organ or Abe Relis buried on their grounds?
I never heard that.
I mean, I have heard that cemeteries typically, I mean, it's not that they wouldn't bury them, but this was much more of a question in Eastern Europe than the United States, but people often want to be buried near important rabbis, especially Chassidim. But if a known criminal made that request, it typically would not be honored. So
Yeah,
that
it's too bad there. I don't believe that Murder Inc. had a Chevre Kadisha,
um,
which I think that would have been a good side hustle for
well, of course, in Buenos Aires, the Tzvi Migdal was a Chevra Kaddish. It was like a Landsmannschaft for criminals.
for criminal. Wow,
So
very cool.
that so they and they had their own cemetery. So that's how they dealt with that in that world. Um, Here's a question that it just says Viswanat, but I'm guessing it's Melech. This is a great question. What is your theory as to why all this history was forgotten? Was it simply an effort to assimilate parallel to the move away from Yiddish?
That and more. That and more. A lot of the platforms on which these things were built, radio, theater. A lot of these platforms went through their own changes that helped to undermine the continuity. After the war, I mean, like for example, the Schwarze Chazanim suffered from a variety of changes. One, the movement away from Yiddish into Hebrew, the movement away from the old style chazanis that had been the cornerstone of synagogue singing art into the newer, what my late father used to call sing along with Michaleh, the kind of congregational singing, and the rise of Israel as a cultural centerpiece rather than looking inward into the just ended history. So a lot of these things happened simultaneously, and these stories just got swept under the rug.
Right, and of course, American Jewry was on to, you know, different and bigger and better things, in their eyes.
Yeah.
So that, that's another aspect to it. Anne Brody asks, what do you know, if anything, about Stewart's cafeterias?
Oh, not a thing, and I'm always willing to learn. That's what's so amazing. You look through, I mean, you go through just lollying through the Yiddish newspapers at the time. You just see all of these cafeterias, all of these restaurants with their incredible identity and some of the most beautiful advertising, really great designs, but it really shows the diversity of restaurant culture of the time, how important it was. People's apartments were small, they were dark. You go out to Sein Zwischen Menschen, these restaurants provided an enormous presence for the Jewish community to manifest itself.
Um, oh, I just want to add that Alan Mann mentions that Arnold Stang was the voice of Top Cat
Top Cat, thank you.
cartoon, and also the sidekick, Milton Berle's sidekick, for a period, I
Oh yeah,
guess.
boy,
Um,
don't get started, Uncle Milty.
all right, Daniel Karkner asks, he says he hasn't seen the book yet, so he doesn't know if you address it, but he asks if in using newspapers as sources, what do you think about the self-aggrandizement or boosterism in ads or coverage for a lot of the figures you're dealing with? Since no one is alive who remembers in many cases, Frank Seidner, the Chazan, got him thinking about it.
About self-promotion.
Yeah.
Yeah. This was the actually, someone like Solomon Shmulevich was kind of a visionary. He understood cross-platform marketing. So here was a guy who was not only publishing songs, but he was recording them, he was singing them in concert, he was publishing the music, he was putting out songbooks. Self-promotion at this time, popular culture was like an incredible release for a lot of these performers who, until this time, really didn't have an outlet. If you were a musician, the best you could hope for is playing an occasional chasana, or for if there was a Yiddish theater that didn't need someone who could read notes. But this was a period and again, something I talk about in the forthcoming radio book that advertising, because of how the American system of giving licenses to broadcasters, it was a pay-to-play system. So it actually created a platform where if you just paid your bills, you had representation on the air. This was unlike anywhere else in the world. So the self-promotion allowed for a lot of stuff that would not have been able to get out in any other context. But this was really the invention of Madison Avenue in Madison Avenue on the Lower East Side.
Right. Okay, Edward Rosenfeld asks, what would have motivated the Schwarze Chazonim to become so steeped in Jewish religion? Or was it really just about the music? And then uh, Al also asks, why did they become cantors? Was this a singing job without racism?
It's an incredibly deeply textured story. On the one hand, this was the era of the rise of the Black Hebrews, the Black congregations who claimed a connectivity to Ethiopian continuity, and so in a way, it's not surprising that if you have these Black Hebrew synagogues, you were going to have a chazan because it fulfills all of the seder. The interesting thing is that the two most famous of the Schwarze Chazonim, Thomas LaRue Jones and Goldie Mae Steiner, Goldie the Schwarze Chazan, were not Jews. They saw this, they came to it as a vibrant performance medium. And they became part of dynamic Yiddish culture at the time. Again, they were specialties on the Yiddish stage. They did radio. They were Edwin A. Relkin, who was like my personal hero, who was the inventor. He had stitched together a national circuit of regional Yiddish outlets. Hundreds of cities around the country were stitched together by the Yiddish theater equivalent of the Underground Railroad. And this was how a lot of these performers, these Black performers, were performing on these circuits. So you had this real connection to the actual community. It wasn't a religious thing, even though someone like Frieda Oisho, the sister of Moshe Oisho, and Frieda was a chazan too, wasn't religious, and she was a legatee. So the Black Cantors were part of a moment in Yiddish culture that allowed for this flexibility that and the press about the Black Cantors is absolutely fascinating because the Jewish community is trying to navigate through what does this mean? What is it? So it's still an amazing reflection of the openness and the real curiosity that was happening in popular culture at the time.
Oh, such a fascinating episode. All right, someone asked if the book has an index. It does, and it's fantastic. Um, as
1,000 footnotes.
Another person asked when the audiobook will be available. So
just finished recording it, and now I get to this is the best part about the audiobook, is I get to lay in a lot of music. So a lot of the stuff that I talk about in the book, you're now going to be able to hear it. And
that's fantastic.
I'm really excited about that. The good thing is that most of the music was from the public domain era, pre 1930s. So yeah, there's going to be, it's really exciting. I'm really thrilled.
That's great. That sounds like it'll be really amazing. This is going to be the last question. Have you ever lived anywhere besides NYC? Why don't you have a New York accent?
Gewalt. I mean, Yiddish was my first language, so I think I had an accentectomy at some point in my life. I'm speaking to you now from Madison, Wisconsin, and believe me, here they hear my New York accent.
Funny. All right. Well, thanks so much, Henry. This was great. This was really enjoyable. Thanks to everyone who joined us. Go out and buy the tourist guide to, I don't know how well you can say that, to Lost
Oh,
New York, Lost Yiddish New York
yeah,
City.
because you have the
Thank you.
background up.
Right.
That's what.
It's fantastic. It's a joy to read, and you will learn a great deal of interesting history. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Eddie. Thank you, YIVO. Sei mir gesinnt.
Seid gesund.